Now, you can't really think about the internet, of course, without thinking about Google, right? And for Google, what we have on our phone, working with them, is of course Google Search. We have that built right into the browser. Just type what you want, hit Google, and you're off. And Google Maps. We've been working very closely with them to make this all happen.
January 9th, 2007, the most famous day in the history of technology. Steve Jobs stands on stage in San Francisco and introduces the device that will change the world, the iPhone. But there is a moment in this keynote that, in hindsight, looks like a scene from a horror movie. Steve Jobs invites Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, onto the stage. Schmidt jokes about how close the two companies are. He says, "If we merged the companies, we could call it Apple Goo." The audience laughs. Steve Jobs laughs. But what Steve Jobs didn't know was that miles away, in a secret Google office, a team of engineers led by a former Apple employee was dissecting his revolution. They were building a weapon designed to kill the iPhone before it even had a chance to breathe. This is the story of the greatest corporate betrayal in Silicon Valley history. It's the story of a man who learned the secrets of innovation at Apple, left to build his own vision, and then sold it to Apple's biggest rival. This is the story of Andy Rubin, the father of Android, and the thermonuclear war he started. To understand the man who would eventually try to destroy Apple, we have to go back to where he started, inside Apple. In 1989, a young, robotic-obsessed engineer named Andy Rubin arrived in Cupertino. He was 26 years old. He wasn't a high-level executive. He was a manufacturing engineer. Rubin fit the Apple culture perfectly. He was brilliant, rebellious, and a massive prankster. Legend has it, he once reprogrammed the internal phone system so that when the CEO, John Scully, received a call, it looked like it was coming from himself. But crucially, Rubin was working at Apple during a very specific time, the General Magic era. Apple spun off a division called General Magic to build the future of handheld devices. Rubin was obsessed with the idea of a computer you could hold in your hand. He absorbed the Apple DNA, the obsession with design, the integration of hardware and software. He loved Apple. In fact, his colleagues nicknamed him Android because of his love of robots. That nickname would stick. Rubin eventually left Apple in 1992 to chase his own dreams. He spent years wandering the tech wilderness. He joined a startup called WebTV, which was bought by Microsoft. He hated the Microsoft culture. He was a hacker at heart, not a suit. He wanted to build something that combined the internet with the phone. In 2003, if you were cool, you didn't have an iPhone, because it didn't exist. You had a sidekick. This was Andy Rubin's first masterpiece. He founded a company called Danger. The device they built, the Hip Top, later rebranded as the Sidekick, was revolutionary. The Sidekick had an app store, sort of. It had cloud backups. It had a full keyboard. It was the first device that made people addicted to mobile data. But Rubin had a problem. The carriers, companies like T-Mobile, Verizon, Sprint, were tyrants. They controlled everything. They decided what apps went on the phone. They crippled the software to sell ringtones. Rubin hated walled gardens. He believed for mobile to truly explode, the operating system needed to be free. It needed to be open. It needed to be a platform that no single carrier could control. He left Danger and started a new secret project in 2003. He bought the domain name Android.com. His plan wasn't to build a phone, it was to build an operating system for cameras. But he quickly realized the camera market was dying, so he pivoted to phones. He ran out of money quickly. He was borrowing cash from friends just to keep the lights on. He pitched Samsung. Samsung executives literally laughed him out of the room. They thought a small team of engineers building an OS to compete with Microsoft and Symbian was a joke. But in Mountain View, two other founders weren't laughing. Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the founders of Google, had a fear. They feared Microsoft. They knew if Bill Gates controlled the mobile OS of the future, he would block Google search. They needed an insurance policy. In July 2005, Google quietly acquired Android Inc. for roughly $50 million. It was a drop in the bucket. Nobody in the press barely noticed. They thought Google was just hiring some talent. But inside Google, Andy Rubin was given a blank check. His mandate? Build a mobile operating system that is so good and so open that it prevents Microsoft from owning the future. And here is where the betrayal begins. At this exact time, Google CEO Eric Schmidt was sitting on Apple's board of directors. He was a close friend of Steve Jobs. They went for walks together. Steve Jobs trusted Schmidt implicitly. He showed Schmidt the prototypes of the iPhone. He discussed the secret roadmap of Apple's OS. Schmidt was playing a double game. He knew Apple was building a touchscreen revolution, yet he allowed Rubin to build a competitor under Google's roof. However, and this is key, Rubin didn't know what the iPhone looked like. In 2006, the prototype Android phone looked like a BlackBerry. It was called Sooner. It had buttons, it had a tiny non-touch screen. Rubin was building a better BlackBerry, not an iPhone killer. Then came January 9th, 2007. Andy Rubin was in a cab in Las Vegas on his way to the CES trade show, watching the Steve Jobs keynote on a laptop. As Steve Jobs swiped to unlock the iPhone, Rubin turned to his colleague and said, "Holy crap, I guess we're not launching that phone." He realized instantly that the BlackBerry model was dead. The iPhone had made every other phone on Earth obsolete in 1 hour. He rushed back to the Google offices. He told his team to scrap Sooner. They needed to pivot. They needed a touchscreen. This was a massive risk. The iPhone had been in development for 2 years. Rubin had to catch up in months. But Rubin had an advantage Jobs didn't. He wasn't building hardware, he was building a platform. He could give the software away for free to Samsung, LG, HTC, and Motorola. Meanwhile, Steve Jobs was starting to get suspicious. He saw Google hiring Apple engineers. He saw the Android rumors. But Eric Schmidt assured him, "Don't worry, Steve. Android is just a different approach. We aren't competing with you." Jobs believed him. He thought Android would be a clumsy BlackBerry clone. He didn't know Rubin was furiously cloning the iPhone's best features: pinch to zoom, the app grid, the browser. In late 2008, the first Android phone launched, the HTC Dream. It was clunky, it was plastic, and it had a physical keyboard. But the software? The software looked familiar. It had notification shade, which Apple didn't have. It had widgets, but most importantly, it looked and felt like a modern smartphone. Steve Jobs went ballistic. He summoned Eric Schmidt and Larry Page to Apple's headquarters. It was a shouting match. Jobs accused them of grand theft. He famously screamed, "I will spend my last dying breath if I have to, and I will spend every penny of Apple's $40 billion in the bank to right this wrong. I'm going to destroy Android because it's a stolen product. I'm going to go to thermonuclear war on this." Jobs felt personally betrayed by Schmidt. He felt betrayed by the Apple DNA that Rubin had used to build the system. Rubin, for his part, didn't care. He wasn't trying to make friends. He was trying to win. He put up a sign in the Android office kitchen that said, "Steve Jobs ate my lunch." Rubin's strategy was open. While Apple released one phone a year, Rubin flooded the world. Dozens of manufacturers released hundreds of Android phones at every price point. Apple had the best phone, but Android had every phone. By 2013, the war was over. In terms of profit, Apple won, but in terms of reach, Android was the undisputed king. It ran on 80% of the world's smartphones. Andy Rubin had succeeded. He had built the most popular operating system in human history. But inside Google, things were changing. Rubin was known as a difficult leader. He ran Android like an independent island, refusing to integrate with other Google services. The culture he built was secretive and abrasive. In 2013, Larry Page asked Rubin to step down as head of Android. Sundar Pichai took over to make Android nicer and more integrated. Rubin left Google in 2014. He was given a hero send-off. But years later, a darker truth emerged. In 2018, the New York Times revealed that Rubin didn't just leave. He was asked to resign following a credible sexual misconduct allegation. Google paid him a $90 million exit package to leave quietly. It was a tarnished end for the father of Android. Today, the thermonuclear war has cooled into a Cold War. Steve Jobs is gone, Andy Rubin is in exile from the tech industry. But look at your phone. If you use an iPhone, you are using features that Android pioneered: notifications, widgets, OTA updates. If you use Android, you are using a touch paradigm that Steve Jobs invented. Andy Rubin may have quasi-betrayed the Apple Brotherhood to build a rival, and Eric Schmidt may have betrayed Steve Jobs' trust to fund it. Without the betrayal, the iPhone might have remained a luxury toy with no competition. Android forced Apple to be better, and Apple forced Android to be usable. The man who built Android didn't just clone the iPhone. He democratized the internet for the billions of people who couldn't afford one. Thank you for watching. Which smartphone OS do you currently use?